Now, a Russian court has found US journalist Evan Gershkovich guilty of espionage, sentencing him to 16 years in prison. Russian investigators claim the Wall Street Journal reporter was collecting data on a Russian tank manufacturer for the CIA. There's speculation a swap deal between Russia and the US may happen in the near future. Our correspondent Steve Rosenberg is in Yekaterinburg for more.
The Wall Street Journal, US officials, Evan Gershkovich supporters call this a sham, a bogus process. It's important to keep in mind. It was held behind closed doors, so that means the media weren't allowed in during the proceedings. Friends and family of Mr. Gershkovich wouldn't have been allowed in. Diplomats, foreign diplomats weren't allowed in. We were allowed in a group of journalists for the verdict. We went into the courtroom. And Evan Gershkovich was standing there in the metal and glass cage, which is known as the aquarium in Russian courts. In came the judge, read the verdict, guilty. He was sentenced to 16 years in a high-security penal colony. Now, I suspect that that's the kind of verdict and sentence that Evan Gershkovich would have expected from a Russian court. Certainly his supporters were expecting something like that. As I say, they say that this was a sham trial. But I think we should pause for a moment just to think about what just happened inside that courtroom. An American journalist convicted of espionage in Russia and sentenced to 16 years in prison. That is unprecedented in modern Russia. I can't remember anything like that happening at all. And now I think attention will turn to whether there is going to be or whether there has been some deal between Russia and the United States on a prisoner exchange, a prisoner swap. There's been a lot of speculation about this, nothing confirmed, but we know, because Russian officials have said it openly, that they would be open to doing some kind of a deal on a prisoner exchange. We know that discussions have been going on for months now between Russia and the United States on some kind of possible deal. And we know, despite the fact that the court behind me has convicted Mr. Gershkovich of espionage and given the 16-year sentence, we know that Russia views jailed Americans as bargaining chips, as some kind of currency to trade for Russians jailed abroad. So I think attention will turn to that and whether some agreement has been or can be reached between Moscow and Washington that would enable Evan Gershkovich to go home.
That's our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg there. Let's speak now to Anton Trianovsky, a New York Times Moscow bureau chief, who joins us from Berlin. And you've worked with Evan in Moscow. You're actually also a friend of his. So just first of all, if I can ask you for your reaction to today's sentencing.
I think Steve put it really well just now, that on the one hand, this was completely expected. We knew these types of trials in Russia pretty much always end in a guilty verdict, and we knew he was going to get close to the maximum of 20 years in prison that he was facing. So it was very much expected, but then if you pause to think about it, it's really such a travesty and such an assault on press freedom and on journalism, and even just on common sense, because it's so clear that Evan was simply doing his job when he was working in Russia and arrested last year.
How is he?
Well, you know, it's possible to exchange letters with him, which I have done over the last year plus since his arrest, and I can say that, you know, he's been incredibly strong. I think he has understood throughout this process what a serious situation this is. But he's kept his hopes up. He's kept his spirits up. He's kept the spirits up of those close to him on the outside who are so worried about him. You know, we can only hope at this point that sometime soon this terrible ordeal will come to an end. But as Steve said, we can really only speculate about that right now.
It is speculation, but, you know, do you think, some hope amongst his friends and supporters that there could be some sort of deal?
That's the most realistic way, unfortunately, that Evan can get out of prison, is is through some sort of prisoner swap. That's how Vladimir Putin and the Russian government have operated in recent years in terms of other imprisoned Americans. At the same time, he should not be in prison. He is completely innocent. He was just doing his job.